Now, we've already mentioned about the 3 pillars of empiricism in this training so far. Those pillars, perhaps you can remember them: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Collectively, when applied, they create an empirical feedback loop. What we mean by that is that it allows us as the Scrum team to gather feedback from ourselves, our stakeholders, or our observations, and move our product towards more value. We can see the evidence of that empirical feedback loop in our artifacts in Scrum, and we adapt those artifacts during our Scrum events. For example, during a sprint review, we might see changes being made to the product backlog based on stakeholder feedback. Now let's take a dive into each of those 3 pillars to see what we mean by the words transparency, inspection, and adaptation. When we talk about transparency, there are many aspects in Scrum that need to be transparent. The Scrum Guide talks about the emergent process, the process the Scrum team use to deliver their product, and also the work itself must be visible to those performing the work as well as those receiving it. Transparency is powerful and important, but it's also hard. Transparency requires trust and being supported by the 5 Scrum values, which we will explore a little bit later. As a Scrum Master, helping a team to be more transparent, to be more open with not just their victories, but also their mistakes, can be really challenging. The reason why transparency is so important in product delivery is because the decisions that we make, i.e. the empirical adaptations, need to be based on a position of truth. It is pointless making adaptations if the state of the work is not truthfully understood. Where we make decisions based on artifacts that have a low transparency, that can lead to decisions that diminish value and increase risk. As the Scrum Guide so aptly puts it, transparency enables inspection. Inspection without transparency is misleading and wasteful. Inspection is the 2nd pillar of empiricism. In order for inspection to enable purposeful adaptation, the artifacts, the progress made on them, and specifically the agreed goals must be inspected by the Scrum team frequently, through the lens of transparency. Every Scrum event creates an opportunity for inspection, and Scrum supports inspection through the cadence of its 5 events. So quite honestly, there's no reason not to inspect, because there's plenty of opportunities to do it. The reason why we inspect so frequently is because we want to identify any variances. Let me give you an example that will sound so obvious, but when applied to product delivery, it is so important. Imagine you're driving down a road, but that road has direction signs every 1 mile. You are able, as the driver, to frequently inspect your position and know that you're on the right track. You are likely to get to your destination. But let's imagine you're driving down the same road, but the direction signs are every 15 miles. In which of those 2 scenarios are you more likely to get lost and not meet your goal? Well, obviously it's the second one. It is for that reason that frequent inspection is important in Scrum, so that we are constantly checking our journey towards product value. And again, to quote the Scrum Guide, inspection enables adaptation. Inspection without adaptation is considered pointless. The final pillar that closes our empirical feedback loop is adaptation. It's great if your team are transparent about their progress and willing to inspect to identify any undesired variances. But if they do nothing about it, then what was the point? If you don't adapt, you lose all of the effort spent being empirical so far. Whenever we identify variances, the Scrum team must adapt as soon as possible to minimize any further deviation from the sprint goal. It's at this point that we can link to a topic that will be coming up later in this training: self-management. When a Scrum team feels empowered and owns the product and problem that they are working on, adaptation is much more simple. It's worth saying the right to adapt doesn't give developers carte blanche to decide what needs to be done. The product owner still remains accountable for the product backlog and the product goal. The takeaway from this video is that Scrum is founded upon empiricism. The Scrum team exercise the empirical feedback loop of transparency, inspection, and adaptation through the use of the Scrum events. Importantly, without closing the feedback loop and making impactful and purposeful adaptations based on truthful observations, you are wasting your time. The 3 pillars of empiricism help you to make the next best step.